Hello and welcome back. In this video, we're going to make a couple of boxes just like this, and the goal is to get the grain on all four corners to match. Now, spoiler alert, we're going to take a thicker board, right? We're going to resaw it and then open it up something like this to create that box. But not quite. Let's jump right in and I'll show you more.
Here I'm rough cutting a very warped chunk of maple, and this maple is kind of unique because it came from a friend's house, and I love projects like that. Wood is beautiful, but it's even more special when you know where it came from. Oh, and side note, here's a little tip. When I'm rough cutting, I like to cut like a slight concave edge, right? So when I go to, run it through the joiner or bandsaw it later, it's not teetering on a convex edge. So in order for the grain to match on all four corners, we need to start with something thick and then we'll split it in half, which means the inside of the boards will become the outside of the box. Now this is important, pay attention, use quarter sawn material, and here's why.
All right, so this is what I was talking about with quarter sawn. You can see those annular rings are basically perpendicular to the faces. And we can take this characteristic right here. If we, let me mark that there. If we flip it over, you can see that it migrates a little bit higher on this side. But that's okay. When we split this board in half, we can shift these since I made them a little bit wider. Originally I went 3 3/4, but I ended up going 4 1/2. Just give myself a little bit of slack, but I can shift those slightly if I need to make all the grain match. So that quarter sawn is kind of important when you're doing a 4-corner book match. 4-corner end match, 4-corner match, whatever you want to call it, you know what I'm talking about.
All right, this part of the video is obviously sped up, but I never really thought that the changeover time on combo machines was a big deal. And after hearing a lot of people on social media complain about it, I thought I'd come up with a solution, really just for fun. It utilizes a couple of gears and a chain, and then you can use a cordless drill to raise and lower the planer bed. I made a video about this cool modification. I'll leave a link in the description. Okay, let's slice this or resaw this in half, and the advantage of that concave edge is obvious, yeah? It's those little ideas, little tips, little tricks that make your woodworking experience more enjoyable and more productive. Now, I know some of you are wondering, why did I joint one face, then plane the other side parallel, instead of jointing one face and one edge? Well, here's why. There's actually two reasons. The second reason is because I'm going to be shifting these boards in height, so that jointed reference edge would be a waste of time. And the first and primary reason, well, I'll circle back to that. I'm actually making 2 boxes, so here I have enough for 4 sides and 4 ends.
All right, so letting those set for a few days, I milled them even thinner, let them set again, cleaned everything up.
I did mill them a little thinner, so they're about 3/8 or about 10 millimeters.
And you can see how well this grain matches, right? So there's my index mark. Open it up like that. Perfect match. Then of course, also a perfect match. Remember, we're using the inside of this, what was once this thickness board. And let's see. I'm gonna put these like this and line those up. The ends are rough cut, so they're not square. I'm going to mark, let me see. Actually, let me put them like this. And I'm going to mark the ends here. I already started to mark this one. Right where this line continues, this grain line. Okay. And we'll line this up. That's beautiful. Put a long straight edge on here, and then I can go off these marks and make that the same on each end.
Same dimension on each end of each board. Now, of course, this dimension is both imperial and arbitrary. You can use whatever dimension to fit your particular box size.
That's 2 3/4 there. That's where I want to cut these to establish the bottom edge, right? And then we can continue. Incidentally, I'm coming up with the size of this by using what's called the golden ratio.
That factor is 1.618, so you can just multiply or divide one of your sides to get the other.
And so I assumed that I wanted the box between 8 and 9 inches. So I just put in that measurement of 8.5 inches. It calculates the length of the side piece for me at 5.2. So what I'll do is I will literally mark 5.2, which is 5 1/4 inches, and then 8.5. Remember, these ends are rough, or 8.5. And this right here, that's where I'm going to make this cut, right? And then from there, I'll have 5.2 and 8.5 this way, get rid of this end waste. And so I'll do the same thing on here, 5.2 and 8, what did I say? 8.5. So right in here is where I want to make the cut. And so you can see I have a long, short, right? Yeah, man, it's awesome.
Now, this video is not really about cutting dovetails with the table saw, although I do have a video on that specifically, and I'll leave a link in the description. And I made these what are called proud dovetails, so they stick out proud. And you'll see the finished product, maybe a bit too proud in hindsight, but I like that little feature. It gives it some contrast or detail. I'm sure many of you are familiar with dovetails, but if you're not, it makes a lot of sense to put a rabbet or rebate on your tailboard. That way you can line things up when you're marking for pins, but you can also just use tape on the inside, which is what I did here. And of course, more proverbial blue tape on the end of the pin board. All right, while this dude fiddles around with this, let's talk about that joiner planer method I mentioned earlier. I like running one face through the joiner that establishes flat on, let's say, a curved, crooked, warped board. One side's flat, that's our reference. Boom. Now, I will run it through the planer, and now I have two faces that are parallel and flat. At this point, I would run either edge through the joiner. And now, since I have two beautiful flat surfaces, I have the option of flipping that board end for end. Even though I have insert cutters, you still get tear out occasionally. Conversely, or controversially, if I just jointed one face and then jointed one edge, it might not be in harmony with the grain running off the edge of the board. That's why I create two flat faces first. Lots of ways to do things. I just feel like two faces to start is better than one face and one edge. Box joints are really quick and easy to make and a super strong joint. And there are tons of videos on showing the process. I like using a sacrificial board. Not only does it back up your work, but you can make a cut in it, add a piece of wood to it, and shift that left to right to get the perfect alignment. And of course, once you're happy with the fit of some test pieces, clamp it tight and rock and roll. One key note is you should be using a flat top kerf cut type blade. On really small box parts, I've actually used a honing guide for chisels or plane irons to get those perfect, beautiful, consistent chamfers. Here I started with 180, then 220. On some species, or depending on the finish, you can go up even higher, perhaps 320 grit. And some sharp chisel action for those areas where you can't really sand. A little bit of glue and some blocks of wood to squeeze everything tight. I love my vacuum bag, but I don't always use it. Sometimes it's easier just to use some cowls, clamps, and my outfeed table. This is made of 1/8 inch material, veneer both sides, and it'll be used to create the bottoms for the interior trays. The larger piece will make up the bottoms for the 2 boxes. The top and bottom edges of each box turned out pretty flush. They just needed a little bit of touch up. And check this out. We've got magnets built in. I didn't show the process because I'm creating an ebook all about magnets. But essentially what I did is, prior to cutting all the box parts to size, I took a thin strip off the top, maybe 1.5 millimeters, 1/16 of an inch, embedded a magnet into the edge, glued that piece back. And once it's in place, it's completely invisible if you clean up your edges correctly. And here is where I sneak in the corresponding magnet in the lid. Yeah, I probably should have cleaned up the edges prior to cutting these into thinner pieces, but there's always solutions in woodworking, yeah? This will make a really nice border. It's going to make that lighter field pop. This banding is kind of small and thin, but it needs a groove for a spline. So I made some quick custom push blocks. This one will hold the front down. They both have a heel, so the height is right. And this one has a hook. Of course, that'll bring the tail end through safely. All right, let's give this a go. Sure, I could have used a fence, but here I'm doing it out in the open. But if you do this, make sure you use a starter pin, or like I'm doing here, I initiate the cut by leveraging off the dust shroud. The gription of that purple sandpaper holds it well in place. Then I can flip the push stick and then safely let it slide as I push it through. Both of these push sticks probably took a couple of minutes to make. Totally worth it to be safe. They were specific for this task, and I'll toss them when I'm done. And then this little dude with the hook, and I can safely push that through. Just like that. Safe, easy, quick, done. I cut the trim slightly thicker than the panel, and notice that I added some sandpaper so I could shim that up just a tad. This will all get flushed later. All right, take note. Notice this auxiliary fence and see how thick it is? That'll provide excellent support for those tiny corner pieces. If that fence is narrow, say 19 millimeters or 3/4 of an inch, well, those 2 cuts will be right next to each other and that middle piece will vibrate. Okay, so this is one of my favorites. Do you see that little screen inside this vacuum attachment? It's just made up of some, old vacuum parts. I can hook up my hose, and that tiny little piece is not going to ricochet across the shop, right? Or get lost. All right, let's hook up the hose. We'll make the cut. Check it out. This is pure magic. I have 2 of these, one for my regular shop vac, so it's larger, has a screen of course, and it'll catch multiple parts. This one will do 1 or 2 before it starts to not have enough vacuum. But it's excellent. It captures those parts. I can pull my hose apart, and boom, that piece is right there, safe. Cool and unique tips like these are in my ebooks. They're actually video and text. They're called Tricks of the Trade, volumes 1 and 2. Of course, splines are a fantastic way to easily add perfect alignment. But a spline's true benefit is its added strength. These tiny little corner pieces, they need more than just glue. Notice those triangular clamping cowls. Perfect. The key is being patient, and once 4 sides are glued on, I add 2 corners at a time.
All right, that came out great. And I'm concerned more about the bottom, right? Because that's what you're gonna see. This seam between the hardwood and this panel will get covered up by the sides of the box, right? Matter of fact, you can see a gap here, and that's actually from the scoring blade since I cut this upside down. But that little gap will cover. This is all nice and tight. And we're just gonna get everything flush with belt sander. Not sure what happened with my belt. It might have been crowding and I wasn't watching it, but didn't hurt anything. And you can see a few pencil marks. So if you can see the pencil marks, you know you're not going to go through the veneer, right? That just came out beautiful and flush. And then we can hit this with a DA orbital, right? Yeah, man. And then I can clean all this bevel up with a hand plane.
And sunlight is just the best type of light. And at this point, I've already used the hand plane on the bevels, all of them except for the corners, and all the long edges, and now we'll hit those little corner edges. All right, this is an excellent technique that I've used many times when I don't have much of a reference. So here, I'm attempting to make the miters line up at the corners, right? And I don't have much of a reference. It's only about 15 millimeters, maybe 5/8. So I can use this stick with sandpaper on it, better gription, right? And lock that in place and then manipulate the hand plane to go across that surface. Of course, my goal here is to align the outer apex of each miter. I'm not concerned about exact 45 degrees. It's a really cool way to be extremely accurate on a very small surface or reference. With all the edges cleaned up and the 2 long chamfers and the 2 short chamfers, I just need to address these corner chamfers. As I hit all these areas mentioned with a hand plane, I didn't worry about the corners matching up. I can do that now. I'm just using a wide, sharp chisel. This is 1 inch or 25 millimeter, and I can just do a paring cut, right? I can easily align the apex of those miters just by hand, just by eye, and with the help of this amazing sunlight. It's very effective. And at this point, I'm going to go shoot my neighbor's dog in the face with a super soaker. I should use box joints more. It's an incredible way to easily add a ton of strength. You have a lot of glue surfaces. They go together very well. Easy to get square. Yeah, strong joint. I love, love, love the Shaper Origin. So many uses. And here I thought it would be a unique way to create a perfect square cut without having to worry about fitting an odd size shaped bottom. In other words, if I would have created that rebate or rabbet with a rabbeting bit with a bearing, I could have easily made a trapezoid shape. Wedges are incredible. They offer a quick and easy way for excellent work holding. I have a video on a killer tapering jig. I'll leave a link. Wedges with real shallow tapers creates superb holding power, similar characteristic to a fine thread machine bolt or screw. Again, a wide chisel that's easy to line up, so I can eliminate those radius corners from the Shaper Origin router bit, and then a small chisel just to get inside those inside corners. I start with a square corner, then make parallel cuts to create a perfect rectangle, and you know it's going to fit. So here I'm fitting this small bottom, and I can mark the edge, right? And you'll notice I have like 3 or 4 pieces of tape on the platform of this shooting board, and I can angle this cut just slightly. As a matter of fact, here you can just see where it's just cutting that top inside surface. The lid was sized with the table saw, and I just got close, right? And now I can sneak up on a perfect fit. But those bevels are going to make sure that the bottom where you see it is really tight.
Even though I have these marked B and B, it actually fits better this way. There we go. That'll work.
When I'm working with small projects like this, I like to keep 2 grits of sandpaper, 180 and 220, adhered to my table saw. And when I spray it with either 3M 77 or 3M 90 or even Easy Tack, I just spray the sandpaper side so that when I need to remove it, I just peel it loose and doesn't leave any residue behind. So what better way to screw things up than with a belt sander? No, I checked my belt and made sure it was, you know, tracking correctly. And this is the best way for me to just flush everything up. Even though this veneer is super thin, find it quick and easy and more efficient than using a scraper. You know, you've got grain going in all different directions, and sometimes a scraper can tear those out. So belt sander with 180, I believe, get everything nice, flush, beautiful, smooth. Check it with raking light. Bam. Now, although the magnets will hold the lid in place, I added 2 thin cleats to the bottom of the lid. This is just so I feel better and the same amount of reveal or overhang will be the same amount of reveal or overhang. I created the length of the small cleats by adding several layers of tape so it doesn't have a lot of slack, which was just about perfect. Then I used a couple of 1/4-inch MDF spacers to hold the cleats in place. Yeah, that's going to work well. It happens. For whatever reason, this lid turned out twisted. You can see a slight twist. The box is flat. So, how do we fix that? I don't want to sand the lid. Of course, if the lid was solid wood, you could sand it or hit it with a hand plane, yeah. But better solution is to just alter the top edge of the box. I did a couple more swipes, biasing toward each opposite corner until it fit perfectly. Since the sliding tray fits pretty well in the width, I made the little cleats pretty thin so you would still have plenty of access to the bottom, and I just glued those in place. I made a little cleat jig, and that would ensure that those 2 cleats were coplanar to each other. And I must have missed getting footage, but the bottom, it was just glued directly to the bottom of the box. You may know by now how much I love using top coat finishes like lacquer or conversion varnish, but sometimes it's just not appropriate. So here I'm using a tung oil / urethane finish. This one's by Waterloo. I've always had excellent results with this, and I'll apply 3 coats. It's always fun to see those colors change and get deep and richer in color as you apply that finish. Since lacquers and top coat type finishes really just sit on top, they don't penetrate as deeply, and so yeah, there's trade-offs with everything, right? These penetrating type finishes, they are more work, so for a small box it's no big shake, but I certainly wouldn't want to do a large commission, bed, headboard, nightstands when doing 3 coats with something like this. I don't know if anybody noticed at this point, that beautiful golden ratio is no longer golden because I screwed up, so the box ended up being narrower. But there's always solutions in woodworking, yeah? I added my signature to the bottom of the box, and I used Shaper Origin to create this with a fantastic accessory called Trace Frame. I'll leave a couple of links in the description so you can see exactly how it works. It's super cool. And there we go. Now, I am positive that you learned a massive amount and got tons out of this video. Well, maybe learned exactly how a box with the grain on all 4 corners can match. Yeah. Anyway, thanks a ton for watching. Make your day amazing.